Did the United States seize millions of gallons of Iranian oil? The short answer is yes. Over the past several years, U.S. authorities have confiscated multiple shipments of Iranian oil worth hundreds of millions of dollars. Washington argues these actions enforce economic sanctions and prevent revenues from reaching the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps. Iran, however, calls the seizures piracy and theft. The dispute has become one of the most controversial chapters in the long-running confrontation between Tehran and Washington. How much oil was involved? How were the shipments intercepted? And why do both countries see the issue so differently? This is the story of America's seizures of Iranian oil. For decades, relations between the United States and Iran have been marked by tension. Following the 1979 Iranian Revolution, Washington imposed sanctions on Tehran. Over the years, additional sanctions targeted Iran's nuclear program, ballistic missile development, the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps, and oil exports. Because oil is one of Iran's most important sources of revenue, sanctions became a central part of U.S. policy. Washington hoped economic pressure would force changes in Iranian behavior. Iran argued that the sanctions were illegal and designed to cripple its economy. Oil is the lifeblood of Iran's economy. For decades, crude oil exports have provided billions of dollars in revenue. But U.S. sanctions made selling oil increasingly difficult. As restrictions tightened, Iran and its customers developed methods to avoid detection. These methods reportedly included ship-to-ship transfers, disabling tracking systems, renaming vessels, and using intermediary companies. The result was the emergence of what analysts often call a shadow fleet. In 2020, the U.S. government announced its largest ever seizure of Iranian fuel. 4 tankers carrying petroleum products bound for Venezuela were intercepted under court orders. According to the U.S. Department of Justice, authorities confiscated approximately 1.116 million barrels of petroleum cargo from the vessels Bella, Bering, Pandy, and Luna. That amount represented tens of millions of gallons. American officials argued that the cargo belonged to the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps and violated U.S. sanctions. Iran strongly rejected the accusations. Iranian officials described the operation as theft and an attack on legitimate commerce. Another major incident occurred in 2023. The Department of Justice announced the seizure of nearly 980,000 barrels of Iranian crude oil transported aboard the tanker Suez Rajan. According to court filings, the vessel's operator agreed to cooperate with U.S. authorities after pleading guilty to sanctions violations. The cargo was ultimately transported to the United States. Combined with earlier seizures, the total amount of confiscated Iranian oil reached well over 2 million barrels. That translates into approximately 84 million gallons of oil. Iran again condemned the action and accused Washington of violating international law. Once the cargo is seized, what happens next? In some cases, the oil is sold. According to reports, proceeds from certain sales have been directed to the U.S. victims of state-sponsored terrorism fund. Washington argues that the money should not benefit organizations under U.S. sanctions. Critics argue that selling another country's oil amounts to confiscation. Supporters respond that the seizures are authorized under U.S. court orders and sanctions laws. The legal and political debate remains intense. Iran has repeatedly condemned the seizures. Officials have used words such as piracy, theft, economic warfare. Tehran insists that the oil belongs to Iran and that American sanctions have no legitimacy outside the United States. At times, tensions have escalated at sea. Both sides have accused each other of unlawful interference with commercial shipping. These incidents have increased concerns about security in the Persian Gulf and the Strait of Hormuz. Can the United States legally seize Iranian oil? The answer depends on whom you ask. American officials point to federal court orders, sanctions laws, and anti-terrorism statutes. Iran and many critics argue that unilateral sanctions should not justify confiscation of foreign property. International legal scholars remain divided. Some view the seizures as legitimate enforcement actions. Others argue they raise difficult questions regarding jurisdiction and international law. The disagreement reflects broader tensions surrounding sanctions and global trade. Reports in 2026 indicated additional interceptions involving vessels suspected of transporting Iranian oil. Reuters reported that several tankers had been intercepted as part of efforts to enforce sanctions and maritime restrictions. The issue remains highly sensitive. Every seizure risks retaliation. Every confrontation raises fears of escalation. And because so much of the world's oil passes through the region, the consequences extend far beyond the Middle East. So, did America take millions of gallons of Iranian oil? The answer is yes. Public records and Justice Department announcements confirm that U.S. authorities have seized millions of gallons, equivalent to more than 2 million barrels, of Iranian petroleum cargo over the years. But whether those actions represent lawful sanctions enforcement or international piracy depends largely on perspective. To Washington, the seizures are a tool of economic pressure. To Tehran, they are acts of theft. And as long as tensions between the two countries continue, the battle over oil, and who controls it, is unlikely to end. If you enjoyed this documentary, subscribe for more stories about geopolitics, sanctions, naval confrontations, and the events shaping the modern world.